Hello and welcome to What's with People with Doc Locke. Fucking shoulders. The goal of these videos is to give mini lessons on phenomena, theories, and topics in social psychology, which is the scientific study of the way people think about, influence, and relate to others. Or in other words, it's the science of why the are people like that? Now, this video focuses on a question that many have asked me, which is, what's with people being so committed to being wrong? Like, why are people so fucking stupid? But what we'll talk about today is that maybe it's not that they're stupid, though some of them could be, but it's that they are so resistant to being wrong that it makes them appear stupid based on what they do to avoid admitting that they're wrong. Also, spoiler alert, we all do it. Of self-esteem, right? It's that thing that people say that we need to have in order to be happy, and that American society in particular has devoted lots and lots of effort to try and boost, from self-help books and memes and motivational speakers and talking to yourself in the mirror every morning telling yourself that you're perfect, you're beautiful, you look like Linda Evangelista. Now, self-esteem is the way that we think about ourselves, or it's a positive or negative evaluation of ourselves, and all these things that I just mentioned were created to try and help us achieve high self-esteem and to try and fix low self-esteem. This is based on the idea that there's many benefits that come from having high self-esteem, and that low self-esteem is If you're curious about your own self-esteem, there are tests that you can take to find out how high or low your self-esteem is. But in all actuality, most of us have a pretty good reputation with ourselves. In fact, in studies of self-esteem, even low-scoring people respond in the mid-range of scores. So for example, a person with low self-esteem still thinks they're okay rather than that they suck altogether. So in general, people feel pretty good about themselves. And people work really hard to keep feeling good about themselves, as shown by how consistently we as humans use what's called self-serving biases to make ourselves feel good about ourselves. Ooh, you got served! Ah! And when I say they work hard, it's mostly their brain that's doing the work without them even being aware that it's happening at all. Self-serving biases are distorted ways of thinking that occur in order to keep or even enhance self-esteem. One example of the self-serving bias is called the above average effect. And just like it sounds, it is how people believe that they are above average on positive traits. When people are asked to rank themselves on qualities like how reasonable or friendly or funny that they think they are, most people say that they're above average compared to others on those qualities, which by law of averages doesn't make any fucking sense. You're gonna have people who are below average, but no one thinks it's them. In general, we all think we're much better than we actually are, which is why our self-esteem is pretty good in general. Another self-serving bias that we do to maintain that self-esteem is by claiming that positive things happen because of how great we are. But when negative things happen, it's because of other people or things outside of ourselves, like saying, I got an A and taking credit for that good grade, versus saying, the professor gave me an F, and implying that it's not your fault. And I'm sure that you can think of examples in your own life of people doing this shit, like when your friend wins a game, it's because they're so talented, but when they lose, it's because of the referees and bad calls or whatever. If they get a job that they interviewed for, it's because they had a great interview and they have all the qualifications. But if they don't get it, it's because the interviewer didn't like them and was totally stupid and I didn't want that job in the first place. But don't think it's just everyone else who does this shit and not you. That's a self-serving bias too. To believe that others are influenced or affected by biases and errors, but that we're not, because we're like so awesome. Now, self-serving biases are normal and they're useful, and everyone does it to some degree, and we do this shit because we're extremely motivated to maintain our self-esteem. In fact, a study found that college students preferred a boost to their self-esteem more than sex and pizza and money and beer. I mean, that's like the 4 food groups for a college student. Oh, ramen. So let's recap. Over half of a century, social psychologists have found that one of the most powerful influences of human behavior stems from our need to maintain positive self-esteem. So we see ourselves as reasonable and moral and smart, but what happens if we do things that imply that we're not those things?
What do we do?
When this shit happens, we feel a variety of emotions: bad, sad, mad. But I'm gonna call it discomfort. And this discomfort caused by performing an action that goes against how we feel about ourselves is called cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance. This discomfort that is felt leads us to try and find ways to reduce that feeling because, again, we want to feel good about ourselves. So we are motivated to change the way that we think or behave, and sometimes in ways that might surprise ourselves and others. So here's an example. Say you're a happy person with a reasonable amount of self-esteem, and then COVID happens! But you still want to go out with friends or go to the stores without wearing a mask, so you do those things. But then you get bombarded with news and information and people saying that wearing a mask and limiting and foregoing social outings is important and necessary to reduce the spread of COVID. Now, this information goes against your self-image because it implies that what you were doing was irresponsible and selfish and immoral or dumb. So you experience dissonance or discomfort, which motivates you to reduce that feeling. So here's the thing, you got a couple of choices. You can change your behavior by wearing masks and not hanging out with friends. However, you can't really undo a behavior that you've already done. So doing this can sometimes make people feel like this is an admission of being wrong. Not to mention, it's often more difficult to change a behavior. So a quicker option might be to just change your thoughts. You can change your thoughts by convincing yourself that COVID isn't really that easy to spread, or that masks aren't really that effective, or that it's no different than the flu, or that only old people die from it and they were going to die soon anyway, or that COVID doesn't even exist at all and it's just a ploy to mess with an election or to strip people of their freedom. Oh God. Whew. Now, doing these things will reduce your dissonance and make you feel happy and comfy again. But check it. All that shit is generally done pretty much without your awareness. It's largely an unconscious process that people don't even know they're doing. And even knowing of its existence like you do now doesn't mean that you still won't do it. But we'll get to that in a minute. Stay tuned. So changing your thoughts is often a preferred method because it's much easier than changing your behavior or admitting that you're wrong. Smoking cigarettes is a great example. It's much easier to convince yourself that you're too healthy to get lung cancer, or that lots of people smoke and don't die from it, or that you'll eventually quit, than to actually go ahead and quit. Now, as I mentioned before, sometimes the need to maintain self-esteem overpowers our thinking so much that we end up rationalizing rather than being rational. Did you see what I did there? So when people are in the middle of trying to get rid of dissonance, they're so involved with convincing themselves and others that they're right that they can end up behaving irrationally or even in harmful ways. So for example, in 1954, a researcher and his colleagues observed a cult that believed that UFOs would come to Earth and rescue them from the apocalypse that was going to happen on a specific date.
It's the end of the world!
Many of these followers ended up quitting their jobs and getting rid of all their earthly possessions in anticipation of this end of the world event, fully believing that it was going to happen. But when the predicted date came and went without anything happening, instead of admitting the wrongfulness of their actions and beliefs, they actually began to believe that their actions were what saved the world. And then they became even more convinced of their beliefs. Now, this seems like an extreme example and it sounds fucking crazy, but this shit happens in everyday scenarios too. These mental gymnastics or justifications may sound ridiculous to others, but it makes absolute and perfect sense to people who are trying to reduce dissonance. There are so many people who don't want to give up their beliefs, even if they've been scientifically discredited, or people who support the bad behavior of a loved politician, or people who doubt the top experts when they're told that they gotta wear masks or not smoke or get vaccinated or believe in global warming or not date someone named Brock. Here's the thing, to most people, the shit that they come up with seems really dumb until you realize that it's almost kind of impressive how creative they can be at denying evidence and reducing their dissonance. For example, many studies have found that when people are presented with information that either supports or opposes their beliefs, people will act in ways that will allow them to stay fully committed to their beliefs and to protect their egos. This is called confirmation bias. It's the tendency for people to seek out and prefer and to remember information that agrees with their beliefs and to avoid or reinterpret information that disagrees with them. This is why we seek out news sources or post memes or become friends with people that typically confirm our own beliefs. But we can't always avoid information that disagrees with us, right? When confronted with information that counters our beliefs, in order to maintain that happy, comfy feeling and to protect our self-esteem, we often avoid or ignore or dismiss or reinterpret or even counter that information, or even go so far as to discredit the sources. A brain scan study found that the reasoning areas of the brain actually shut down when a person is confronted with opposing information. Now, this makes it easy to dismiss information as being invalid or irrelevant or false or manipulated or fake news. People will also interpret information or data differently depending on what they already believe. In one study, people were provided evidence that supported the idea that capital punishment deters crime, and it had both strong and weak arguments. And then they also provided them with evidence that went against this, again with both strong and weak arguments. They found that whichever strong argument supported their views was taken as truth at face value and remembered. But they ended up dismissing the information that went against their beliefs without even considering it, and ended up only remembering the weak arguments for the opposing side. So is it surprising then that this happens in politics? In one study, college students were asked which political candidate they liked best before watching a presidential debate. And after watching the debate, they were asked to then rate the quality of each of the candidates' arguments. The students were more likely to rate their preferred candidate as having won the debate. Now, this is because they remembered the strong moments that their candidate had, while only remembering the weak moments for the opposing candidate. So you may be thinking, oh yeah, like I totally got a dumbass uncle or coworker or parent or whatever who does that shit like all the time, dismissing information or ignoring actual data or even discrediting the source. Oh yeah? Well, what's your source? Just some dumb blonde who cusses all the time? But the thing is, you probably are doing it to some capacity too. And like I said before, it's mostly done under our awareness. I'm even prone to doing it, and I studied this shit. Everyone is affected by cognitive dissonance and the need to maintain self-esteem, and it's because it works. But if we spend all our time and effort defending our fragile little baby egos, we would never learn from our mistakes or bad decisions or incorrect beliefs, and those can have very terrible consequences. Like when a political figure defends their decision to start a war even after being given evidence that contradicts their reasoning, or when cult members commit suicide because of their strong commitments to false beliefs, or when prosecutors will try to block efforts to reopen cases after receiving new evidence. Now, even though it's mostly an unconscious process, we do have the ability to stop it by becoming more aware of the way that it works. So in order to not fall victim to the impact of our self-serving biases and cognitive dissonance, pay attention to the next time that you feel discomfort after acting in a way or receiving information that goes against your values or beliefs. And you can pause the self-justification shit before it even starts, and make sure that you're acting and reacting to the situation and information in a non-biased way. It's all about keeping our egos in check and being able to say, I'm wrong. I'm wrong every once in a while wouldn't hurt us either. It did hurt a little. Hi! Welcome! It's me! It's me, Doc Locke! Nah. Alexa, stop. Stop it. You're embarrassing yourself. Ugh. Fuck! Ugh. I fixed it! My